The silence in Cedar Ridge was the kind that pressed against your eardrums like water at depth. Detective Marcus Kane had forgotten how oppressive mountain quiet could be until he stepped out of his rental car that December morning in 1989, his breath forming ghost-white clouds in the bitter Oregon air. 23 years with the FBI had taught him to read places like crime scenes. Cedar Ridge was a town holding its breath. Population 847, according to the weathered sign that greeted visitors with painted pine trees and forced cheerfulness. But Marcus could see the truth in the boarded windows, the way residents hurried past without making eye contact, the Christmas decorations that hung like bandages over deeper wounds. His knees protested as he stood, a souvenir from too many years chasing monsters through too many dark places. Retirement was supposed to mean fishing trips and crossword puzzles, not standing in ankle-deep snow staring at a crime scene that had been calling to him for 3 sleepless months. The call had come on a Tuesday. Sheriff Linda Morrison, voice tight with the kind of control that barely contained panic. "We've got 3 bodies, Marcus. Same signature you've been tracking." The Red Choir. Even thinking the name made his jaw clench. 12 years since the case had nearly destroyed him. 12 years since he'd failed to stop them before they vanished like smoke. And now they were back, or someone was pretending to be them with terrifying accuracy. Marcus pulled his coat tighter and approached the old logging road where Deputy Tom Brennan waited beside yellow crime scene tape that fluttered in the wind like prayer flags. Brennan looked young enough to be Marcus's son, all nervous energy and uncertain authority. "Detective Kane?" Brennan's voice cracked slightly. "Sheriff Morrison's waiting up at the site. Fair warning, sir, it's bad." Marcus nodded, following the deputy up a narrow trail that wound between towering Douglas firs. The snow crunched under their boots with a sound like breaking bones. As they climbed, Marcus noticed the trees. Every 100 yards or so, symbols had been carved into the bark. Not random scratches, but deliberate markings. A circle bisected by 3 vertical lines. The same symbol he'd seen carved into victims' foreheads in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco between 1975 and 1977. The Red Choir's calling card. They reached a clearing where the forest opened like a wound. Sheriff Morrison stood at the center, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face carved from the same granite as the surrounding peaks. She'd been Marcus's first partner when he'd started with the Bureau, before she'd chosen small-town law over federal cases. He'd always respected her instincts. "Marcus," she nodded grimly. "I wish it was under better circumstances." "Show me." She led him to where 3 bodies lay arranged in a perfect triangle, each positioned with their arms crossed over their chests, their heads pointing toward the center of the formation. The snow around them was stained russet brown, but Marcus knew the blood would have been crimson when fresh. It always was with the Red Choir. "Mal, mid-30s, Morrison began, her voice clinical. "Joseph Hartwell, local mechanic. A female, early 40s, Sarah Chen, worked at the library. And male, late 20s, David Polk, bartender at Murphy's Tap." Marcus knelt beside the first body, his trained eye cataloging details. The cuts were precise, ritualistic. Each victim showed the same pattern. 3 parallel incisions across the throat, arranged to form what looked like musical staff lines. The symbol carved into each forehead was fresh, deep enough to expose skull beneath. "Time of death?" Marcus asked. "Coroner estimates between midnight and 3 a.m. 3 days ago. Hikers found them yesterday morning." Marcus stood, his breath forming clouds as he processed the scene. The positioning was identical to the original Red Choir murders. The cuts, the symbols, even the choice of location an isolated clearing with clear sightlines to the sky. But something felt wrong. Too perfect, too clean. Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. She met his eyes. Shoot. How many people in this town knew about the Red Choir case? Her pause was telling. More than you'd think. True crime podcasts, internet forums. That book about your cases came out last year. The Profiler's Dark Cases or something like that. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd refused to cooperate with that book, but the author had done his research. Too much research. Details that should have stayed buried were now public knowledge. Instruction manuals for wannabe killers. But this, he gestured at the scene. This isn't a copycat. The symbol placement, the blood patterns, the victim positioning, it's too accurate. Only someone who was there would know these details. Or someone who has the original case files. They locked eyes, both thinking the same thing. The Red Choir had never been caught. The case had gone cold when the murders stopped in 1977, leaving behind only questions and nightmares. Marcus had spent the next 12 years chasing leads that went nowhere, watching shadows that might have been nothing, listening for whispers of the choir that had gone silent. "Sheriff?" Deputy Brennan's voice cracked across the clearing. "You need to see this." They found him at the edge of the tree line, staring at something carved into the bark of a massive pine. Not the circle and lines this time, but words. Fresh cuts, sap still bleeding from the wounds in the wood. The song is not over. Marcus Kane knows the tune. Winter solstice approaches. The choir awaits its conductor. Marcus felt ice form in his veins that had nothing to do with the mountain air. This was personal. Someone knew he was coming. Someone had been waiting for him to find this message. "Sir?" Brennan's voice seemed to come from far away. "What does it mean?" Marcus stared at the carved words, his mind racing through possibilities, each one darker than the last. The winter solstice was in 9 days. In the original case, the Red Choir had always escalated toward the solstice, their final performance planned for the longest night of the year. But they'd vanished before that night came. "It means," Marcus said quietly, "that someone's been waiting 12 years to finish what they started." As if summoned by his words, the wind picked up, howling through the trees with a sound like voices singing in harmony, the kind of sound that made you believe in things that went bump in the night. The kind of sound that had given the Red Choir their name. Sheriff Morrison moved closer, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. "Marcus, what aren't you telling me about this case?" He looked at her, this woman who'd been his partner through his early years, who'd seen him at his best and worst. She deserved the truth, even if it would keep her awake for the rest of her life. The Red Choir wasn't just a cult, Linda. It was a family. And families have a way of passing down their traditions. The wind died suddenly, leaving only the oppressive silence of the mountains. In that silence, Marcus could swear he heard something else, faint, almost imaginary, but unmistakably familiar. Singing. The Cedar Ridge Sheriff's Station occupied a single-story brick building that had seen better decades. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, which suited Marcus just fine as he spread the original Red Choir case files across the conference table. Each manila folder contained a piece of his soul, scenes he'd never fully escaped. Sheriff Morrison sat across from him, reading through witness statements with the focused intensity that had made her a good detective. Deputy Brennan took notes, his young face growing paler with each detail. "Remind me," Morrison said, not looking up from a crime scene photo, "why the Bureau never caught them." Marcus rubbed his temples where a headache was building. Because they were ghosts. No fingerprints, no DNA evidence. This was before we had good genetic profiling anyway. No witnesses who lived to testify. They appeared, killed, and vanished like smoke. But you had a profile. Organized, methodical, highly intelligent, multiple perpetrators working in coordination. The kills were too precise, too ritualistic for a single individual. He pulled out a folder marked Behavioral Analysis. I estimated 3 to 5 core members with a charismatic leader. They selected victims who fit specific criteria: creative types, musicians, artists, writers, always taken from urban areas but killed in remote locations. Why creative types? Marcus had asked himself that question for 12 years. The Red Choir believed that artistic people had purer souls. They thought their ritual murders were literally composing music from human suffering. Each scream, each dying breath was a note in their symphony. Brennan looked up from his notepad. That's insane! Insane, maybe, but organized insanity. They never deviated from their pattern. 3 cuts across the throat, arranged like staff lines, the symbol carved into the forehead. Bodies arranged in geometric patterns that corresponded to musical notation. Morrison pulled out a map marked with red pins. 17 victims over 2 years. Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Oakland. Always urban centers, always isolated kill sites within 50 miles of the city. And then they stopped. Marcus traced a finger along the timeline. December 20, Honest, 1977, the winter solstice. We were waiting for them to strike, had increased patrols, stakeouts on likely locations, but nothing happened. They just disappeared. Until now. Maybe. Marcus pulled out a photograph from the most recent crime scene. But look at this. Joseph Hartwell, Sarah Chen, David Polk, a mechanic, a librarian, a bartender. None of them fit the original victim profile. Morrison leaned forward. You think it's a copycat after all? I think someone wants us to think it's a copycat, but the execution is too perfect. Whoever did this had intimate knowledge of the original murders, knowledge that was never made public. The door burst open, letting in a gust of cold air and a woman with fire in her eyes. She was mid-30s, wearing a heavy coat over jeans and boots, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She moved with the confident stride of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. Dr. Emily Watson, she announced, extending a hand to Marcus. I'm the forensic anthropologist Sheriff Morrison called in from Portland State. Marcus shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the way she made direct eye contact. Detective Kane, FBI, retired. I know who you are. I've read your papers on ritual murder patterns. Brilliant work. She pulled out a chair and sat down without invitation. I've been analyzing your 3 bodies. We need to talk. Find something interesting? Disturbing, more like it. She opened a leather satchel and pulled out a stack of photographs. The cuts on your victims weren't made with a knife. Marcus felt his blood chill. What? The wound patterns are too smooth, too precise. A knife would leave microscopic metal traces in the bone. These cuts were made with something sharper, something that could slice through flesh and cartilage without leaving any foreign material behind. Like what? Dr. Watson met his eyes. Like glass. Specifically, like obsidian. Volcanic glass honed to a molecular edge. It's sharper than any metal blade, and it leaves no trace. The room fell silent. Marcus felt the pieces of a puzzle shifting in his mind, forming a picture he didn't want to see. The original Red Choir used obsidian blades, he said quietly. We never released that detail to the public. There's more, Doctor. Watson pulled out another photo. The symbol carved into each forehead was made with a different instrument, something hot enough to cauterize the wound as it cut. The edges show signs of thermal scarring. A heated blade? More like a brand, but not metal. The thermal patterns suggest something organic, maybe wood or bone, heated until it glowed, and then used like a stylus. Morrison leaned back in her chair. No, Marcus said, remembering details he'd tried to forget. They performed on them. The Red Choir didn't see their victims as people, they saw them as instruments. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The old songs are the best songs. Check your email. Marcus pulled out his laptop, his hands steadier than they had any right to be. In his inbox was a message from an address he didn't recognize. Choir Masterone 1977 at encrypted.com. The subject line read, "A personal invitation." He opened it, aware that everyone in the room was watching him. The message was brief. "Detective Kane? How wonderful to know you remember our work. We've been following your career with great interest. Retirement suits you poorly. The new composition requires your participation. You were always meant to be part of the final performance. Tomorrow night, midnight. The old logging road where we left our latest arrangement. Come alone, or more innocence will provide the high notes for our symphony. The choir remembers its debts. The conductor. P.S. Your partner, Detective Morrison, might want to check on her daughter. Music school in Portland can be so dangerous this time of year." Marcus felt the world tilt. Morrison's daughter, Jessica, was a violin student at the University of Portland. The Red Choir had always been one step ahead, always knew more than they should. "Linda," he said carefully, "call Jessica, now." Morrison's face went white. She grabbed her phone, dialing with shaking fingers. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then voicemail. "This is Jessica Morrison. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you." "She's not answering," Morrison said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus was already reaching for his coat. "Dr. Watson, I need you to stay here and analyze every piece of evidence we have. Look for anything that might tell us where they're hiding." "Where are you going?" "Portland, to find Jessica Morrison before they add her to their composition." "I'm coming with you," Morrison said. "Linda, they want me to come alone tomorrow night. If we spook them. If my daughter dies because I stayed behind, I'll never forgive myself." She grabbed her coat and keys. Besides, they didn't say anything about tonight. As they headed for the door, Brennan called out, "Sheriff, what should I tell the press if they show up?" Morrison paused at the door. "Tell them we're dealing with a gas leak. Keep everyone away from the logging road until we get back." Marcus knew it was a lie that wouldn't hold for long. In small towns, secrets spread like wildfire, and the kind of secret they were dealing with had a way of burning everything in its path. The drive to Portland would take 2 hours on mountain roads made treacherous by ice and snow. 2 hours to find a girl who might already be dead. 2 hours to prevent the Red Choir from claiming another victim. As they pulled out of the station parking lot, Marcus caught sight of something in the rear-view mirror. A figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching them leave. Too far away to make out details, but something about the way it stood, perfectly still in the falling snow, made his skin crawl. When he looked again, it was gone. The University of Portland campus looked like a postcard in the falling snow, all red brick and ivy, warm light spilling from dormitory windows. But Marcus had learned to see past surface beauty to the darkness that could hide underneath. Tonight, the shadows between buildings seemed deeper, more purposeful. Sheriff Morrison sat rigid in the passenger seat, her knuckles white around her phone. She'd tried calling Jessica 17 times during the drive. Each unanswered ring had carved another line of worry into her face. "The music building," she said, pointing to a Gothic structure that looked like it belonged in a different century. "That's where she practices." Marcus parked near the main entrance, noting the security cameras and the card reader that controlled access. How would the Red Choir get inside?
On the back of the photo, in different handwriting, the soloist is prepared. The concert begins at midnight. You know where to find us? Morrison grabbed the photo, her hands shaking. She's alive. She's scared, but she's alive for now. Pocketed the sheet music. Need to get back to Cedar Ridge. They want me at the logging road at midnight. You're not going alone. Linda, if I don't show up, they'll kill her. If I bring backup, they'll disappear, and we'll never find her. Body. They stared at each other across the empty practice room, both knowing the impossible choice they were facing. Save Jessica and give the Red Choir what they wanted, or maintain protocol and watch an innocent girl die. There's something else, Morrison said quietly. Something I didn't tell you earlier. Marcus waited. The 3 victims in Cedar Ridge weren't random. Joseph Hartwell was my nephew. Sarah Chin was my ex-partner from Portland PD. David Polk was... He was someone I dated briefly last year. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. They were targeting people connected to you. Drawing you to Cedar Ridge was just part of the plan. They wanted both of us here. She looked at the photograph of her daughter. This whole thing has been orchestrated from the beginning. Marcus felt the familiar weight of being 3 steps behind a superior opponent. The Red Choir had always been master manipulators, but this level of long-term planning suggested something more than just revenge. Why wait 12 years? He asked, thinking out loud. Why resurface now? Because something changed, something that made them feel safe enough to start killing again. They were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Multiple people, moving with purpose. Marcus pulled Morrison behind the door, his hand moving instinctively to his weapon. The footsteps stopped outside room 347, a voice, muffled but clearly audible. They were here. The scent is still fresh. Another voice, higher pitched, the conductor. Will be pleased. Hush. Everything is proceeding according to the composition. What about the girl? She's safe. For now. Her part doesn't come until the finale. The footsteps moved away, heading toward the stairwell. Marcus counted to 30 before cracking the door open. The hallway was empty, but the smell lingered something, like incense mixed with old books and something else, something organic and unpleasant. They made their way back to the parking lot, checking every shadow and doorway. The snow was falling harder now, and the campus had taken on an otherworldly quality, all soft edges and hidden depths. Marcus Morrison said as they reached the car, I need you to promise me something. What? If it comes down to a choice? Between catching them and saving Jessica, you save my daughter. Marcus met her eyes. Linda, promise me. I know what kind of man you are. I know you'll try to do both. But if you can't, if it comes down to one or the other, you save her. Marcus nodded, though he knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. The Red Choir had been his white whale for 12 years, the case that had defined and nearly destroyed his career. But looking at Morrison's face, seeing the fear of a mother who might lose her child, he knew that some things were more important than closure. They drove back toward Cedar Ridge in silence, the weight of the approaching midnight pressing down on them like a physical force. The mountain roads were treacherous in the snow, and more than once Marcus had to fight to keep the car on the pavement. It was 10:30 p.m. when they reached the town limits. Midnight was 90 minutes away, and they still had no plan beyond showing up and hoping for the best as they pulled into the sheriff's station parking lot. Marcus noticed that all the lights were on inside the building. Too many lights for a small-town police station after hours? That's not right, Morrison said, reaching for her service weapon. They approached the building cautiously, noting that the front door was standing open despite the cold. Inside, they found Deputy Brennan tied to a chair, conscious but gagged. His eyes were wide with terror, and he was making urgent noises behind the tape across his mouth. Morrison pulled the tape free while Marcus checked the rest of the building. They were here, Brennan gasped. 3 of them, maybe 4. They came in about an hour ago, said they were looking for you. What did they want? They took all the case files. Everything you brought from the Red Choir investigation. And they left something, nodded toward the conference table where they'd spread out the evidence earlier. It was covered with sheet music, dozens of pages arranged in a complex pattern. At the center of the arrangement was a conductor's baton, carved from what looked like human bone. Marcus approached the table slowly, his trained eye taking in the details. The sheet music was handwritten in the same careful script they'd seen at the university, but these were different compositions, older. Some of the pages were yellowed with age, suggesting they'd been written years ago. One page in particular caught his attention. At the top, in faded ink, the Marcus Kane Sweet Movement I, the Profiler's Lament below that. Musical notation that meant nothing to him, but at the bottom of the page. Words that made his blood run cold. Every hunter becomes the hunted. Every song must have an ending. Choir has been patient, but patience is a finite resource. Tonight, the final movement begins. Morrison read over his shoulder. They've been planning this for 12 years. What? No, Marcus said, studying the faded ink, the way the paper had yellowed with age. They've been planning this longer than that. This page, it's from before the original murder stopped. The implications were staggering. The Red Choir hadn't disappeared in 1977. They'd been watching, waiting, planning. And Marcus Kane had been part of their composition all along. His phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Time to face the music, detective. The audience is waiting. Marcus looked at the clock on the wall. 11:15 p.m. 45 minutes until midnight. 45 minutes until he walked into a trap that had been 12 years in the making. But first, he had to try to save Jessica Morrison. Even if it meant becoming the final note in the Red Choir symphony, the old logging road stretched into the forest like a wound in the earth. Its surface rutted with frozen tire tracks and patches of black ice that reflected the pale moonlight. Marcus drove slowly, his headlights cutting through the darkness ahead of him while Sheriff Morrison crouched in the back seat. Hidden beneath a blanket, but very much present despite the Red Choir's demand that he come alone. They'd left Deputy Brennan at the station with instructions to call for backup if they didn't return by dawn. Not that backup would matter much if the Red Choir had planned this as thoroughly as the evidence suggested. Talk to me. Morrison's voice was muffled by the blanket. What are you thinking? I'm thinking this feels like a trap within a trap. Marcus replied, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. They want me here, but they also want you to think you're outsmarting them by hiding in the car. You think they know I'm here? I think they've known every move we were. Going to make sense before we made it? The road curved ahead and Marcus could see the glow of firelight through the trees. Not electric light, but the warm flickering orange of actual flames. As they drew closer, he could make out the shapes of torches planted in the ground, creating a pathway that led from the road to the clearing where they'd found the 3 bodies. This is it, Marcus said, pulling the car to a stop. Linda, I need you to wait here. Give me 30 minutes. If I'm not back by then, if you hear gunshots or screaming, you call for every available unit, and you don't stop until this forest is crawling with law enforcement. What if they have Jessica somewhere else? So then we'll deal with that when we come to it. Marcus checked his service weapon, ensuring a round was chambered. He'd been retired for 6 months, but some habits died hard. He also carried a small MAL recording device, hoping to capture something that might help other law enforcement if things went wrong. The forest felt different at night, alien and hostile. The torches cast dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames, and the snow crunched under his boots with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. As he followed the torchlit path, Marcus noticed details he'd missed. During the day, more symbols carved into trees, but these were different from the circle and lines marking they'd seen earlier. These were more complex, almost like a written language, telling a story he couldn't read. The path opened into the clearing where they'd found the bodies. But now the space had been transformed. The snow had been cleared away in a perfect circle, revealing dark earth beneath. At the center of the circle, someone had built a fire that burned with flames that seemed too bright, too steady to be natural. Around the fire, arranged in a precise pattern, were 12 figures in red robes. They stood perfectly still, their faces hidden by deep hoods, their hands folded in front of them. Marcus counted them carefully, definitely 12, though he couldn't tell if they were male or female, young or old. At the far edge of the circle, tied to a wooden chair that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of oak, was Jessica Morrison. She was conscious, alert, and clearly terrified, but she appeared unharmed. The tape had been removed from her mouth, though she wasn't making any sound. Detective Kane. The voice came from the figure standing directly across the fire from him. Male, middle-aged, with the kind of cultured accent that suggested education and refinement. "How good of you to accept our invitation." "Let the girl go," Marcus said, his hand resting on his weapon. "Your argument is with me. But Detective, you misunderstand the nature of our art. Jessica isn't just a hostage. She's a vital part of the composition. Her fear, her youth, her innocence, these are the elements that will make the final movement truly sublime." The figure lowered his hood, revealing a face that Marcus recognized from 12 Years of Nightmares. Dr. Samuel Thorne, former professor of music theory at Berkeley, suspected leader of the Red Choir who had disappeared without a trace in 1977. "You're supposed to be dead," Marcus said. "Death is just another note in the grand symphony, Detective. We've been very much alive, watching, waiting, preparing for this moment." Thorne gestured to the other robed figures. "Allow me to introduce the surviving members of the Red Choir. We've grown smaller over the years, but our dedication to the art has never wavered. What do you want?" "What we've always wanted. To create something beautiful from something terrible. To transform human suffering into transcendent art." Thorne smiled, and Marcus could see that his teeth had been filed 2 points. "You've been chasing us for 12 years, Detective. You've studied our methods, analyzed our patterns, tried to understand the music we create. Tonight you become part of that music." Marcus felt the familiar chill of being outmaneuvered. The 3 Bodhies. In the clearing, they were bait. Bait implies deception. We prefer to think of them as the opening movement, a way to get your attention, to draw you back to the work you never finished. And Sheriff Morrison's daughter, insurance, to ensure your cooperation during the final performance. Other robed figures stepped forward, and Marcus recognized the voice from the university, higher pitched, younger. "The conductor has been very patient, Detective Kane, but patience is a finite resource, and tonight is the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, when the veil between worlds is thinnest." "What veil?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "The veil between sound and silence, between life and death, between the music we make and the music that exists in the spaces between notes." Thorne moved closer to the fire, his face taking on an otherworldly quality in the dancing light. "We've spent 40 years perfecting our art, Detective, learning to read the secret language that connects all living things. Tonight, we perform our masterpiece, the Symphony of Silence," Marcus said, remembering the sheet music they'd found. "Precisely. And you, Detective Kane, will be our featured soloist." The robed figures began to move, forming a tighter circle around the fire. Marcus could see that each one carried something of ritual implements, musical instruments that looked like they'd been crafted from bone and metal. "Here's what's going to happen," Thorne continued. "You're going to walk to the center of the circle. You're going to kneel by the fire. And you're going to participate in a ceremony that will transform your life force into something eternal and beautiful. And if I refuse, then Miss Morrison will take your place, and we'll hunt down everyone you've ever cared about until we have enough participants for a full orchestral arrangement." Marcus looked at Jessica, saw the tears streaming down her face, the way she was. Trying to be brave despite her terror, thought about Sheriff Morrison hidden in his car, probably watching through binoculars and fighting every instinct to come charging into the clearing. "I need to know something first," Marcus said. "Why me? Why target me specifically?" Thorne's smile widened. Because you're the only one who truly understood us, Detective. The only one who came close to appreciating the artistry of our work. We've read your psychological profiles, your behavioral analyses. You saw us not as monsters, but as artists working in an unconventional medium. You're insane. Insanity is just another word for a perspective that others don't understand. We've transcended the limitations of normal human consciousness, Detective. We've learned to see the music that exists in everything, in the sound of a heart stopping, in the rhythm of final breaths, in the silence that follows the last note. The fire flared higher, and Marcus could see that it wasn't burning wood. The flames were consuming something organic, something that smelled like incense and copper, and the sweet sixth scent of decay. Time to choose, Detective Thorne said. Join us willingly, and Jessica Morrison lives to see another day. Refuse, and she becomes the opening note of our symphony. Marcus looked around the circle, counting exits, calculating angles, trying to find a way out that didn't end with everyone dead. But the Red Choir had planned this too well and anticipated every possible response. That's when he heard a sound that made his heart leap with hope and terror in equal measure. The distant wail of sirens growing closer by the second. Sheriff. Morrison hadn't waited 30 minutes. Thorne's expression shifted from confidence to rage. You brought backup. I brought justice, Marcus replied, pulling his weapon, something you wouldn't understand. The clearing erupted into chaos as the robed figures scattered, some heading for the trees, others pulling out weapons of their own. Marcus dove toward Jessica, trying to reach her before the Red Choir could use her as a human shield. But Thorne was faster. He grabbed Jessica's chair, dragging her toward the opposite side of the clearing where the forest was thickest. If we can't have our symphony, Detective, then no one can. Marcus fired 3 shots, but Thorne and Jessica had already vanished into the tree line. The other robed figures were scattering like disturbed crows, some falling to Marcus's gunfire, others melting into the darkness with practiced ease. Sheriff Morrison emerged from the forest at a dead run, her weapon drawn, 3 deputies behind. Her, the clearing filled with the sound of shouting, gunfire, and the crackling of the fire that continued to burn with its unnatural intensity. Where is she? Morrison screamed over the chaos. Thorne took her into the forest, Marcus pointed. Toward the tree line. He's heading for the old mine shafts. Morrison didn't hesitate. She plunged into the darkness, following the trail of broken branches and disturbed snow. Marcus was right behind her, his heart pounding as they crashed through the underbrush. Forest seemed to close in around them as they ran, branches tearing at their clothes, roots catching their feet. Behind them, the sound of the deputies securing the clearing grew fainter, until all they could hear was their own ragged breathing and the crunch of snow beneath their boots. There. Morrison pointed ahead to where a faint light bobbed between the trees' flashlight. They followed the light deeper into the forest, past abandoned logging equipment and rusted machinery that looked like the bones of some ancient beast. The terrain was getting steeper, more treacherous, and Marcus could feel his lungs burning in the thin mountain air. The light ahead stopped moving. They approached cautiously, weapons ready, and found themselves at the edge of a ravine that dropped away into darkness. On the far side, perhaps 20 feet away, Thorne stood with Jessica at the edge of another drop-off. He held an obsidian blade to her throat, the volcanic glass catching the moonlight like a shard of frozen night. It's far enough, Thorne called across the ravine. One more step, and I opened her throat. Morrison raised her weapon, but Marcus put a hand on her arm. Too far, too dark. One wrong shot, and he kills her out of spite. What do you want? Morrison shouted. What I've always wanted, to complete the symphony. To add one perfect note to the composition that will echo through eternity. Thorne's voice carried easily across the ravine, clear and calm despite the chaos behind them. Detective Kane, you have 1 minute to decide. Join us willingly, and Jessica lives. Refuse, and she becomes the final note whether you participate or not. Marcus looked at the ravine, calculating distances and angles. 20 feet across, maybe 30 feet deep. The sides were steep, but not vertical. If he could get across, I'll do it, he called out. But first, let me see that she's unharmed. Thorne pulled Jessica closer to the edge and in the moonlight. Marcus could see that she was trying to tell him something. Her eyes were wide with terror, but there was something else, their intelligence, determination. She was trying to communicate. She mouthed a single word: jump. Marcus understood. Jessica Morrison wasn't just a victim waiting to be rescued. She was her mother's daughter, and she was planning something. "All right," Marcus said, loudly enough for Thorne to hear. "I'm coming across. I need you to step back from the edge. Give me room to land." Thorne smiled, his filed teeth gleaming in the moonlight. "Of course, Detective. We want you to arrive safely." Marcus backed up, getting a running start. The ravine was wide, but not impossible. He'd made harder jumps in his younger days, though. Never with so much riding on the outcome. He ran forward, his feet finding purchase on the rocky ground, and launched himself across the gap. For a moment, he was flying through the darkness, the wind rushing past his face, the sound of his own heartbeat loud in his ears. He landed hard on the far side, rolling to absorb the impact, his shoulders screaming in protest. But he was across, and more importantly, he was close enough to act. Thorne was already moving, dragging Jessica toward him with the obsidian blade still pressed against her neck. "Excellent, Detective. Now if you'll just kneel here beside the edge, ... That's when Jessica made her move. She stomped down hard on Thorne's instep, driving her heel into his foot with all the force she could muster. Thorne's grip loosened for just a moment, just long enough for her to twist away from the blade. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He dove forward, tackling Thorne around the waist and driving him away from Jessica. They rolled across the rocky ground, fighting for control of the obsidian blade. Thorne was stronger than he looked, and the blade was wickedly sharp. Marcus felt it slice across his forearm, parting flesh like water. Blood ran down his arm, but he held on, trying to force the weapon away from both of them. "You don't understand?" Thorne gasped as they struggled. "This isn't about killing. This is about transcendence, about creating something eternal from something temporary. You're just another serial killer with delusions of grandeur," Marcus replied, managing to get his hand around Thorne's wrist. "I've seen dozens like you. You've seen nothing." Thorne's voice rose to a shriek. "You've never heard the music that lives in the spaces between heartbeats. You've never felt the rhythm of a soul leaving its body. You're deaf to the symphony that surrounds us." Marcus twisted Thorne's wrist, forcing him to drop the blade. It clattered across the rocks, the obsidian edge chipping against the stone. Without the weapon, Thorne seemed to deflate, his manic energy suddenly spent. "It's over," Marcus said, pulling out his handcuffs. "The Red Choir is finished. The Red Choir is eternal." Thorne replied, but his voice was quieter now, almost sad. "We've planted seeds in a dozen cities, Detective. Students who understand the true nature of music, believers who will carry on our work. Jessica." Morrison's voice echoed across the ravine. "Are you all right?" "I'm okay, Mom," Jessica called back, her voice shaky but strong. "We're okay." But as Marcus snapped the handcuffs around Thorne's wrists, he noticed something that made his blood chill. The man's eyes were rolling back in his head, his body convulsing as if he were having a seizure. "Poison," Thorne whispered, a thin line of foam appearing at the corner of his mouth, hidden in a false tooth. "The show must go on, Detective. Music must continue." No. Marcus tried to keep Thorne upright, tried to clear his airway, but it was too late. The leader of the Red Choir was dying, taking his secrets with him. "The children understand," Thorne gasped with his last breath. "They've heard the true music. They'll carry it forward." Marcus felt for a pulse, found nothing. Dr. Samuel Thorne, the man who had orchestrated 12 years of nightmares, was dead. But instead of feeling relief, Marcus felt only a deep sense of unease. The Red Choir might be finished, but Thorne's final words suggested that their work would continue. Somewhere out there, other believers were waiting to pick up where their leader had left off. The Cedar Ridge Sheriff's Station had been transformed into a war room. FBI agents, state police detectives, forensic specialists crowded into the small building, their voices creating a constant buzz of activity that Marcus found oddly comforting after the supernatural silence of the forest. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at the ravine. 3 days of interviews, evidence processing, and the slow, methodical work of trying to understand what the Red Choir had been planning. Marcus sat in the corner of the conference room, his left arm in a sling from the obsidian blade, watching the organized chaos unfold around him. Dr. Emily Watson stood at the front of the room, pointing to a map of the United States that had been covered with red pins. Each pin represented a location where the Red Choir had operated, or where they suspected the cult had supporters. Based on the evidence we've recovered, she was saying, we believe the Red Choir had active cells in at least 12 cities. Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Denver, Chicago, New York, Boston, Atlanta, Miami, New Orleans, and Houston. FBI agent Sarah Chenot, relation to the Cedar Ridge victim, looked up from her notes. Any evidence of recent activity in these locations? That's where it gets interesting, Watson replied, and disturbing. We found evidence of ritualistic murders in 7 of these cities over the past 6 months. Murders that were written off as cult activity, gang violence, or random killings. Marcus felt his stomach drop. How many victims? We can confirm, possibly more.
That's some chase slides.
Showing crime scene photos from different cities. The methods varied, but the underlying patterns were consistent. Ritualistic cutting, symbolic markings, precise positioning of bodies. They were practicing, Marcus said quietly. Preparing for something bigger. That's our assessment. The Cedar Ridge murders weren't just bait to draw you in, Detective Kane. They were a test run for a much larger operation. Sheriff Morrison, who had been quiet throughout the briefing, finally spoke up. What kind of operation? Watson hesitated, looking at Agent Chen for permission to continue. No, Chen nodded. We found detailed plans in Thorne's belongings. Maps, schedules, lists of potential victims. They were planning simultaneous attacks in multiple cities, all coordinated to occur during the winter solstice. Yesterday, Marcus said, realizing the implication, they were planning to strike yesterday. Exactly. And we don't know if stopping the Cedar Ridge cell was enough to prevent the others from moving forward. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Marcus had thought they were dealing with a localized threat, a small group of fanatics who had been waiting 12 years for revenge. But the scope of what Watson was describing was much larger, much more dangerous. There's something else, Watson continued. We found evidence that the Red Choir had been recruiting from colleges and universities. Specifically, they were targeting music students, art majors, and creative writing programs. Why? Agent Chen asked. Because they believed that artistic people were more receptive to their philosophy. They thought creative minds could better understand the music they were trying to create. Marcus thought about Jessica Morrison, tied to a chair in the forest, chosen not just because she was the sheriff's daughter, but because she was a violin student. The Red Choir's methods were more sophisticated than anyone had realized. Detective Kane, Agent Chen said, "You've studied this group longer than anyone. What's your assessment of the threat level?" Marcus considered his words carefully, and the Red Choir has always been about long-term planning. They don't improvise. They don't react emotionally. Everything they do is part of a larger composition. He paused, looking around the room. Thorne's death doesn't end this. If anything, it might accelerate it. How so? Because martyrdom is the final note in any symphony. His death becomes part of their mythology, proof that their cause is worth dying for. The surviving members won't see his death as a defeat. They'll see it as the opening movement of something even grander. Watson nodded grimly. That matches what we found in their written materials. They had contingency plans for Thorne's death, detailed instructions for continuing the work without him. Who takes over? Morrison asked. That's the problem. Red Choir's organizational structure was deliberately compartmentalized. Each cell operated independently, with only limited knowledge of the others. We know there are other leaders, but we don't know who they are or where they're located. Marcus felt the familiar frustration of being always one step behind. What about the other members you captured in the forest? 3 dead, 2 in custody. Out. The ones in custody aren't talking. They seem to genuinely believe that revealing information would somehow damage the composition they're part of. Fanatics, Agent Chen said dismissively.
No, Marcus corrected.
Artists. That's what makes them so dangerous. They're not killing for pleasure or profit or even revenge. They're killing because they believe they're creating something beautiful. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The conductor is dead. Long live the conductor. Marcus showed the message to Agent Chen, who immediately began making calls to trace the number. But Marcus knew they wouldn't find anything. Red Choir had been evading law enforcement for decades. They weren't going to be caught by a simple phone trace. We need to consider the possibility that stopping the Cedar Ridge cell actually made things worse, Marcus said. If the other cells were waiting for some kind of signal, Thorne's death might have been that signal. You think they're accelerating their timeline? I think they're moving to the next movement in their symphony. We have no idea what that. Sounds like Watson pulled up another slide, this one showing a timeline of the Red Choir's activities. Based on historical patterns, they typically go dormant after a major operation. They retreat, regroup, and plan for the next phase. They've never lost their leader before, Marcus pointed out. They've never had to operate without Thorne's guidance, which means they're either going to fall apart, Agent Chen said, or they're going to become even more dangerous. Marcus knew which option was more likely. The Red Choir had survived. For 40 years, by being adaptive, by planning for every contingency. They wouldn't simply dissolve because their leader was dead. I want to interview the survivors, Marcus said. The two in custody, they're not talking to anyone. They'll talk to me. Agent Chen looked skeptical. What makes you think that? Because I'm the only one who understood their work, Thorne said so himself. They might hate me, but they respect. Me, that gives me leverage. Morrison stood up. I'm going with you. Linda, you don't need to. They targeted my family. They used my daughter as bait. I want to look them in the eye and understand why. Agent Chen considered this. Fine, but we do this by the book. Full recording lawyers present if they request them and no physical contact with the prisoners. Nodded, though he suspected that standard interrogation techniques wouldn't work on the Red Choir members. They weren't ordinary criminals motivated by fear or self-preservation. They were believers, and believers required a different approach. Dr. Watson, he said, I want you to analyze every piece of evidence we have. Look for patterns, connections, anything that might tell us what the other cells are planning. What are you looking for specifically? The next movement. The Red Choir doesn't do anything randomly. If we can understand the structure of their composition, we might be able to predict their next move. As the meeting broke up, Marcus found himself alone with Morrison in the conference room. She looked older than she had 3 days ago. The stress of recent events etched into the lines around her eyes. How's Jessica? He asked. She's strong. Stronger than I expected. She wants to go back to school, get back to her normal life. Morrison managed a small smile. She asked me to thank you. She saved herself. That move she made with Thorne, that was all her. She learned that from watching me. But she would have died in that forest if you hadn't been there. Marcus nodded, accepting the gratitude but not feeling like he deserved it. Jessica Morrison was alive, but 23 other people were dead. The Red Choir was still out there. Still planning, still believing that murder was a form of art. Marcus Morrison said quietly, what if we can't stop them? We keep trying, we keep fighting. We keep believing that justice matters even when it's hard to find. And if that's not enough? Marcus looked at the map covered with red pins, each one representing a life lost to the Red Choir's twisted vision. And we make sure that when the final note plays, we're there to hear it. The Oregon State Penitentiary interview room was a sterile box painted institutional green, with a metal table bolted to the floor and fluorescent lights that hummed with electrical tension. Marcus sat across from Sarah Kellerman, age 24. Music theory graduate student and captured member of the Red Choir. She looked younger than her file suggested, with pale skin and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. There was something else in her expression, a kind of serene confidence that Marcus recognized from other fanatics he'd interviewed over the years. It's Miss Kellerman, Marcus began. I'd like to talk to you about Dr. Thorne, she smiled. And Marcus noticed that her teeth had been filed to points like her leader's. The conductor is never really gone, Detective Kane. He lives on in the music he taught us to hear. The music you hear when you kill people. the music that exists in all things, the rhythm of heartbeats, the melody of breathing, the harmony, that emerges when a soul transitions from one state to another. Her voice was calm, almost dreamy. You've heard it too, haven't you? In your work, in the cases you've studied, the moment when chaos becomes order, when violence becomes art. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. I've seen violence, I've seen death, I've never seen art. Because you're listening with the wrong ears. The conductor tried to teach you, but you weren't ready. She leaned forward slightly, but you're closer now. The events in the forest changed you. You felt something, didn't you? In that moment, when you were fighting for the girl's life, when everything hung in the balance, you heard it. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but she was right. There had been a moment, in the seconds before Jessica twisted away from Thorns. Blade, when everything had seemed to slow down, and he'd felt connected to something larger than himself. Tell me about the other cells, he said, changing the subject. Other cells. She tilted her head like a curious bird. There are no cells, Detective. There is only the choir. We are notes in a symphony that spans continents, connected by harmonies. That you can't perceive? How many of you are there? As many as there need to be. The conductor planted seeds everywhere he went. Some grew into full-throated singers. Others remained quiet until their moment comes. What moment? Her smile widened. The moment when the final movement begins. The moment when the song becomes something greater than the sum of its parts. Marcus tried a different approach. Why Jessica Morrison? Why target a child? Wasn't. A child. She was an instrument. Young voices have a purity that older ones lack. Her fear, her innocence, her potential, these were the elements that would have made her contribution to the symphony truly sublime. You're talking about torture and murder. I'm talking about transformation, about taking something temporary and making it eternal. She paused, studying his face. You understand, don't you? In your work, you've seen how death can reveal truth. How the worst moments of a person's life can sometimes be the most honest. Marcus thought about the crime scenes he'd investigated, the victims he'd tried to save, the killers he'd profiled. There was a twisted logic to what she was saying, perspective that would be seductive to someone who'd spent years staring into the abyss. The other members of your group, he said. Are they planning something? We're always planning something. The music never stops, Detective. It just changes tempo, shifts key, moves from one movement to the next. That's not an answer. The only answer that matters. No, you're thinking like a law enforcement officer, looking for specific threats and concrete plans. But the choir operates on a different level. We respond to the music as it develops, improvising within the larger. Composition. Sheriff Morrison, who had been silent throughout the interview, finally spoke. You used my daughter as bait. You terrorized an innocent girl. How do you justify that? Sarah Kellerman turned to look at her, and Marcus saw something shift in her. Expression. Not remorse, but something more complex, a kind of artistic appreciation. Your daughter was perfect, she said softly. Young, talented, connected to the forces that were drawing you and Detective Kane together. She was the bridge between the old composition and the new one. She was my child. She was our inspiration. Conductor spoke of her often, how her voice would complete the symphony he'd been composing for decades. Morrison's hand moved toward her weapon, but Marcus caught her wrist. She's trying to provoke you. Don't give her what she wants. What I want, Sarah said, is for you to understand. The conductor didn't die in that forest. He transcended. He became part of the music itself, and now that music is spreading. Spreading how? Through the students he taught, the believers he inspired, the seeds he planted in a dozen cities. She closed her eyes, as if listening to something only she could hear. Can you hear it, Detective? The sound of voices joining in harmony across the country? The rhythm of preparation? The melody of anticipation? Marcus felt his pulse quicken. What are they preparing for? The next movement. The conductor may be gone, but his composition lives on. And the most beautiful part is that you're still part of it. You've always been part of it. I'm not part of anything you're doing, aren't you? You spent 12 years thinking about us, studying us, trying to understand us. You've made us the center of your professional life, your personal obsession, whether you realize it or not. You've been composing with us all along. Marcus stood up, signaling that the interview was over. Guard. But Sarah Kellerman wasn't finished. The winter solstice was just the beginning, Detective. The real performance starts now, and you'll be in the front row, whether you want to be or not. As they left the interview room, Morrison was shaking with suppressed rage. That woman is insane. No, Marcus said quietly. She's a true believer. That makes her infinitely more dangerous. They walked through the prison corridors in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah Kellerman had been telling the truth about. Something. The Red Choir was planning something, and whatever it was bigger than anything they'd done before, outside the prison. Dr. Watson was waiting for them with a manila folder thick with documents. You need to see this, she said without preamble. We've been analyzing the evidence from the forest, and we found something that changes everything. What? The sheet music we recovered from the scene? It's not just random notation, it's a map. Marcus felt his blood chill. A map of what? Locations across the country. Each note corresponds to a specific geographic coordinate. We've checked them against our database of suspected Red Choir activity, and they match perfectly. Morrison looked at the folder. How many locations? And that's just the ones we can identify from the complete sheets. There were fragments of other compositions that we haven't been able to decode yet. Marcus opened the folder, seeing musical notation that he couldn't read, but somehow understood. Each note was a target, each rest a pause between attacks, each crescendo a building towards something catastrophic. There's more, Watson continued. The timing notations on the sheets suggest that, whatever they're planning, it's happening in stages. The first movement already occurred. That was the preparatory attacks over the past 6 months. And the second movement. Based on the tempo markings, it should be starting soon. Within the next few days, Marcus looked at the sheet music again, seeing it with new eyes. The Red Choir hadn't just been planning random attacks. They'd been composing a symphony of violence that would span the entire country, with each note carefully chosen to create maximum impact. We need to contact the FBI immediately, he said. Get agents to all of these locations. Set up surveillance, warn local law enforcement. Already in progress, Watson replied. But Marcus, there's something else. Something that's going to complicate everything. The final movement. According to the musical notation, it requires a specific participant, someone who's been part of the composition from the beginning. She met his eyes. They're not done with you yet. Marcus felt the weight of 12 years pressing down on him. He'd thought that stopping Thorn would end the Red Choir's reign of terror. Instead, it had simply begun the next movement in a symphony that had been building since 1977, somewhere out there, cities across America. The surviving members of the Red Choir were preparing for their next performance. And Marcus Kane, retired FBI profiler, was still their featured soloist. Whether he liked it or not, the FBI field office in Portland resembled a military command center. With agents manning phones, computers, and radios around the clock, Marcus stood before a wall-sized map of the United States. Red pins marking the locations identified from the Red Choir's musical notation. Each pin represented a potential target, a note in their deadly symphony. Agent Chen approached with a cup of coffee and a grim expression. We've got confirmation from Chicago. 3 bodies found in Lincoln Park, arranged in the same triangular pattern we saw in Cedar Ridge. Marcus felt his stomach drop. When? 2 hours ago. The scene is identical to what we found in Oregon obsidian blades. Ritual markings, the works. She handed him a photograph transmitted from the Chicago field office. There's more. Left a message carved into a nearby tree. Marcus studied the image, seeing words burned into bark with the same heated implement they'd used to mark their victims' foreheads. Movement 2, Allegro Con, Focal Movement 2, he said quietly, playing with fire. There's been similar activity in Denver and Boston, all within the past 6 hours. Chen updated the map, adding new pins to mark the latest attacks. We're looking at a coordinated operation across multiple time zones. Doctor, Watson looked up from her analysis of the musical notations. The tempo marking Allegro con fuoco suggests they're accelerating their timeline. Whatever they're building toward, it's happening faster than we anticipated. Sheriff Morrison, who had driven down from Cedar Ridge, studied the map with the eye of someone who'd spent years tracking patterns. They're not random. The cities, the timing, there's a logic to it. What kind of logic? Musical logic? Look at the pattern of attacks. She traced a line between the pins. If these are notes in a composition, then the spacing between them creates a rhythm, and the rhythm is accelerating. Marcus saw it now. The attacks weren't just geographically distributed, they were temporally orchestrated. The Red Choir was literally composing their symphony in real time, with each murder serving as a note in a larger musical structure. They're conducting themselves, he said. Even without Thorne, they're following his composition. But who's the conductor now? Chen asked. Before anyone could answer, Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. But he recognized the pattern. The Red Choir had been contacting him regularly since the forest confrontation. Detective Kane, he answered. Hello, Marcus? The voice was female, cultured, with a slight accent he couldn't place. I believe we need to talk. Who is this? I'm someone who appreciated Dr. Thorne's work. Someone who understands the importance of your role in our composition. A pause. My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm a professor of musicology at Columbia University. I'm also the Red Choir's new conductor. Marcus signaled for the others to start. A trace on the call. What do you want? Want to complete the symphony that Samuel began. Spoke of you often, Marcus. He believed you were the key to creating something truly transcendent. I'm not part of your sick game. Oh, but you are. You've been part of it since the beginning. Every case you've solved, every profile you've created, every killer you've caught, you've been composing with us, adding your voice to our choir. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. Elena Vasquez's name was familiar, but he couldn't place it. We met before? Very good. Seattle, 1976. You were a young FBI agent, just starting to work violent crimes. I was a graduate student at the University of Washington, studying the intersection of music and psychology. The memory hit him like a physical blow. A conference on criminal psychology, a wine reception afterward, a conversation with a brilliant young woman who'd been fascinated by his work on behavioral analysis. He'd been flattered by her attention, had even considered asking her out. Elena Vasquez, he said, the name finally clicking. You wrote your dissertation on the psychology of artistic expression. I wrote it about you, Marcus. About how law enforcement officers develop almost artistic sensibilities in their pursuit of criminals. You were my inspiration. You were studying me. I was studying with you, learning from you. Understanding how your mind works, how you think. About violence and death and the patterns that connect them. Her voice grew warmer, more intimate. Samuel recruited me after reading my work. He said I had a gift for understanding the music that exists in chaos. Marcus looked around the room, seeing the concern in his colleagues' faces. What do you want from me? I want you to join us willingly. Stop fighting the composition and start contributing to it. You have insights that could help us create something truly beautiful. I'm not helping you kill people. You're already helping us. Every time you predict our next move, every time you analyze our methods, you're contributing to our artistic vision. The question is whether you'll do it as a collaborator or as an AL, unwilling participant. Agent Chen held up a note. Call traced to Manhattan. Teams mobilizing. Elena Marcus said, trying to keep her talking. Why are you doing this? You're an educated woman, a professor. You could have a normal life. Normal life. She laughed, and there was genuine amusement in her voice. Marcus, I've spent 20 years studying the deepest expressions of human creativity. I've seen how great art emerges from suffering, how beauty can be born from tragedy. The Red Choir isn't about death. It's about transformation. It's about murder. It's about creating something eternal from something temporary. It's about taking the raw material of human experience and shaping it into something that will outlast us all. Marcus heard voices in the background, urgent and professional. The FBI teams were closing in on her location. I have to go, Elena said. But this conversation isn't over. The second movement is just beginning, and you have a crucial part to play in the finale. Alina, wait, listen carefully, Marcus. The next note will be played in San Francisco. Tomorrow night, it's a symphony hall where Samuel first heard the music that inspired our work. The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, feeling the weight of 20 years of history pressing down on him. Lena Vasquez wasn't just the Red Choir's new conductor. She was someone who had been studying him for decades, learning his patterns, understanding his methods. Did we get her, Chen asked. She's gone, but she gave us something San Francisco tomorrow night. It's the Symphony Hall. Watson was already pulling up information on her computer. Davies Symphony Hall. It's been the home of the San Francisco Symphony since 1980. That's where Thorne first encountered the Red Choir's philosophy, Marcus said, remembering details from the original case files. Attended a performance there in 1975. Claimed he heard something in the music that changed his understanding of artistic expression. So it's symbolic, Morrison said. Pilgrimage site for their movement. More than that, it's where they plan to perform their finale. Marcus studied the map, seeing the pattern of attacks in a new light. The other cities, the timing, the victims, it's all been preparation for something bigger. What kind of something? Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his mind, forming a picture that was more horrifying than anything he'd imagined. A live performance, in front of an audience. Chen looked up from her computer. There's a concert tomorrow night. The San Francisco Symphony is performing Mahler's Resurrection Symphony. Sold out 3,000 people. It's 3,000 potential victims, Watson said quietly. Or 3,000 witnesses, Marcus corrected. The Red Choir has always been about creating art from death. What better way to complete their symphony than to perform it in front of the largest possible audience? Morrison was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling the San Francisco field office. We need to evacuate that concert hall. No, Marcus said, his hand stopping her. If we evacuate, they'll just move to another target. Another audience? We need to let the performance go on. With 3,000 people at risk, with 3,000 people as bait. The Red Choir has been planning this for decades. They won't be deterred by a simple evacuation. But if we can catch them in the act, if we can be ready for them, they're talking about using innocent people as human shields. Marcus met her eyes. I'm talking about ending this. The Red Choir will keep killing until we stop them. If we don't make our stand in San Francisco, they'll just take their show somewhere else. Agent Chen was already coordinating with the San Francisco. Asterisk, asterisk. That is the end. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe so I can improve and make more videos just like this. Thanks. It helps a lot. Anyways, sweet dreams, and see you in the next video.